At the end of the 1990s, a young woman disappears in Germany. And this despite the fact that the most important event of her life is about to take place: the birth of her daughter. She has prepared everything for this. The nursery is furnished, the baby clothes have been bought, and a name has been chosen for her daughter. Nevertheless, 17-year-old Maike Thiel disappears from one day to the next, and she is never found. Today, it is assumed that Maike was murdered. 2 people were even convicted for the crime, but they maintain their innocence to this day. But how can they defend themselves against circumstantial evidence so strong that even the Federal Court of Justice upheld the verdict? And how do you prove a murder when there isn't even a body? Maike Thiel is 17 years old and, in 1997, leads a perfectly normal teenage life. She lives with her parents in Legebruch, a small town north of Berlin, Germany. Maike has just finished 10th grade when something happens that will turn her normal life upside down. The teenager realizes that she is pregnant, and it's her ex-boyfriend Michael's child. The two were together for 4 months at the end of 1996, but broke up shortly before the end of the year. Michael is only 17 years old himself and is training to be a road builder at the time. A difficult situation then, not only for Maike herself, but also for her boyfriend Michael and their parents. So it's all the better that all parties sit down together in February 1997 to discuss how to proceed. The possibility of Maike having an abortion is also on the table. It is important to the adults that Maike knows that no one would hold it against her and that everyone would understand. After all, Maike still has her whole life ahead of her and is almost a child herself. At this meeting, Maike and Michael's mother, Christine S., also sit down together in private. Christine became a mother at a young age herself and can therefore talk to Maike on equal terms, or so the reasoning goes. But the conversation does not go well at all. There will later be 2 different versions of the exact course of this conversation. Christine S. says she once again explained the risks for Maike's future, but also concluded by saying that Maike could only make the decision for herself. The other side later claimed that Christine S. had said loudly during this conversation that Maike would not have her child, and if she did, it would be taken away from her. Regardless of which version is true, Maike decides to have the child. Although her parents make an appointment for her to have an abortion at a clinic, Maike cancels the appointment at the last minute. She leaves her parents and Michael, who has shown up at the clinic, standing there and runs out of the hospital. Her decision is now final. She wants to have the child. Maike is convinced about the pregnancy and is really looking forward to her baby. She knows that life as a young mother won't be easy, but her parents are supporting her. Although the Thiels weren't enthusiastic about the pregnancy at first, they are now doing everything they can to help Maike with the preparations. Everything is already prepared in Maike's parents' apartment. Maike has lovingly furnished a nursery for her daughter herself. Her parents have specially remodeled and rearranged the apartment so that there will soon be room for one more little person. The plan is for Maike and her daughter to continue living with Maike's parents, who will help look after the child. This should enable Maike to start training as a geriatric nurse. It's a solid and sensible plan. Unfortunately, her relationship with Michael looks less stable. The two remain separated, and Michael was very shocked by his ex-partner's pregnancy. He even raises the possibility that he may not be the father. This will be clarified with the help of a paternity test once the baby is born. Otherwise, Maike and Michael no longer have any contact with each other. Despite all the reasonableness and preparation on the part of Maike and her parents, the situation remains difficult. On July 2nd, 1997, Maike visits her best friend Nicole and stays overnight. The two have known each other their whole lives, in the truest sense of the word. Nicole's and Maike's mothers were in the hospital together when they gave birth to their daughters. Maike and Nicole went to kindergarten together, lived in the same apartment building for years, and went to school together. For Nicole and Nicole's mother, it goes without saying that they will support Maike during her pregnancy and afterwards, when the baby is born. That's why the sleepover on July 2nd fits in so well. Nicole and her mother now live a few kilometers away in Henningsdorf, where Maike has her prenatal appointments during her pregnancy. She has an appointment on the morning of July 3rd, so it's perfect that she's sleeping at Nicole's from July 2nd to July 3rd. Nicole lives only a few minutes' walk from the hospital. This means that Maike can attend her appointment at 8:50 a.m. in a relaxed manner, despite the early hour. Maike wants to get the appointment over with quickly and then go back to Nicole's to drive to Berlin with her and go shopping there. Maike therefore only takes her maternity log with her. She leaves her wallet and money at Nicole's. This prenatal appointment is one of the last before the birth of her baby. In about 6 weeks, she will be able to hold her child in her arms. Maike already has a name for her unborn daughter. The girl, who is due to be born in the summer of 1997, will be called Charlene. But unfortunately, Charlene will never see the light of day because her mother disappears and is never found. At noon on July 3rd, Nicole is starting to get worried. Maike was only supposed to go to the hospital for a checkup. After that, the two of them were going to go shopping. But Nicole waits in vain for her friend. Of course, doctor's appointments can sometimes take longer than expected, but something seems to be wrong. Nicole informs Maike's parents, and both parties begin making phone calls and searching the area around the hospital. They also call Maike's ex, Michael, but he says he doesn't know anything. On July 4th, Maike's father reports the 17-year-old missing to the police. There is no clue as to where Maike might be. She didn't tell anyone that she had any plans. She didn't leave a message and didn't make any obvious preparations to leave home for a longer period of time, especially since that doesn't make any sense. Maike is heavily pregnant and looking forward to her daughter. Nothing could explain why she would suddenly decide not to come home. However, Maike's doctor's statement gives pause for thought. She advised the 17-year-old to go to another doctor in Berlin immediately after the examination to have something checked out. Maike is said to have replied that this was not possible. She said she had plans to go to the Baltic Sea with a friend. This friend really exists, and his parents do own a house on the Baltic Sea. But Maike's statement to the doctor was still a lie, because she had made firm plans to go shopping with Nicole. So maybe the Baltic Sea vacation was just a spontaneous white lie. A vacation is somehow a more reasonable excuse for postponing a doctor's appointment than wanting to go shopping. Maike's acquaintance was also called and asked if he had made plans with Maike. He said no. Years later, people will criticize the investigators for not digging deeper at this point, for example. But that doesn't happen. Perhaps this is partly because another aspect of this case is no less strange. Namely, that Nicole saw Maike's ex-boyfriend Michael near the hospital at noon on July 3rd. While waiting for Maike to return, Nicole looks out the window down the street that leads from her apartment to the hospital. She sees Michael driving by in a car. Michael even waves hello. Michael also admits that he was in Henningsdorf that morning, but he has an explanation. He says he was supposed to drop a letter in a mailbox near Nicole's apartment on behalf of his mother. After that, he went shopping. However, there are no receipts or other evidence of these purchases. All that is known for certain is that Michael was near the hospital at around the time Maike had her appointment, and that she has been missing ever since. Some earlier reports also state that witnesses saw Maike getting into a car at the hospital. Well, Michael was traveling by car. In 1997, Michael and his mother Christine S.'s home was searched quite quickly. In one room, a scrap of paper written on by Christine was found. It reads, 3rd of July, 1997, 8:50 a.m. and that is exactly the time Maike Thiel had her appointment at the hospital. Christine claims she can't remember what the note was about. It was probably an appointment for car repairs. However, the police find out that the family's car repair shop doesn't give out such exact appointments. This makes the whole thing even more suspicious. Although Maike and Michael had hardly any contact anymore, he called Maike on the evening of July 2nd, 1997. From this phone call, he also knows that she had a doctor's appointment the next day and wanted to go shopping with Nicole afterwards. Michael admits this. However, he denies having known the exact time of the doctor's appointment. Maike's friend says that Michael called specifically to confirm what time the appointment was. This does not cast Michael and his mother Christine in a good light, but it is not concrete evidence that either of them committed a crime. Rather, it is circumstantial evidence. Meanwhile, Maike remains missing. First for weeks, then for months. In April 1998, Michael is questioned by the police again. He is actually questioned as a witness, but in the course of the interrogation, his status changes to that of a suspect. However, Michael is not properly informed of his rights. For example, he's not told that he can hire a lawyer. The police continue to investigate Michael and his mother, but do not have enough evidence to press charges or take anyone into custody. In July 2000, the case is closed for the time being, 3 years after Maike's disappearance. Every now and then, there are reports of witnesses who claim to have seen Maike Thiel. For example, a married couple who met a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Maike. The young woman was accompanied by a young man and talked to the couple about Henningsdorf, the place where Maike disappeared. However, like every other lead, this one also came to nothing. Until, more than 15 years later, a woman made a statement to the police that finally provided a decisive clue. The woman's name is Dominique S. Investigations into the Maike Thiel case were resumed back in 2011. Christine and Michael were placed under surveillance, and the family's property and car were searched again. Without result. In the course of the new investigations, however, the police are also trying to contact old and new witnesses again. And one of them is Dominique S. In 1997, she was 17 years old, just like Maike and Michael, and had been dating Michael for a while. At the time, she did not provide any information to the police. Investigators suspected early on that Dominique might know more. But she was very close to Michael at the time and probably didn't make a statement because of that. 15 years have passed since then. Dominique has since become a mother herself and no longer has any significant contact with Michael. So the police decide to try again. In 2012, Dominique is questioned again. At first, she again makes no statements about the matter. Only after some time, when Dominique is alone with a policewoman in the interrogation room, does she break down. She tells the policewoman about Michael and what he allegedly confided in her after Maike's disappearance. Unfortunately, the only record of this statement is a video without sound. In a second formal statement, however, Dominique confirms her statements once again. She reports that Michael confessed to her that he had something to do with Maike's disappearance. His mother, Christine, had developed a plan to prevent Maike's baby from being born. Michael picked Maike up from the hospital on July 3rd and drove her to a remote wooded area, together with an accomplice. Once they arrived at the wooded area, something happened. The accomplice, whom we will come to later, tried to strangle Maike from the back seat. Maike fought back and even bit Michael, who was sitting in the driver's seat, on the arm, leaving a scar. Ultimately, however, she died in the car. Unfortunately, it is no longer possible to determine exactly what happened with the scar because Michael has since had his arm completely tattooed. Incidentally, his other arm is free of large tattoos. Dermatological reports on the matter are inconclusive. It could be that there was a scar there, but it could also be that there wasn't. another of Michael's ex-girlfriends, Lydia C., tells a story that fits in with this. After an emotional conversation between Lydia and Michael, he whispered in her ear that he had to do it himself. From the investigator's point of view, it refers to the murder of Maike Thiel. Lydia and Dominique never met each other and made these statements independently of each other. Christine S. has an alibi for the alleged day of the crime. Her son drove her to work in the morning and she was there all day. According to the public prosecutor's office, she arranged this specifically. Michael himself does not have a solid alibi. Instead, there are now 2 witnesses who have independently reported that Michael confessed to them that he was involved in the murder of Maike Thiel. And that is finally enough for the Thiel family to get the charges they have long been waiting for. Michael and Christine end up in court. A special feature of the case is that Michael is also being charged in a regular court, not a juvenile court. This was certainly a possibility, as he was only 18 years old at the time of the alleged crime. However, the court sees no reason to assume that there was any significant delay that would justify a hearing before the Juvenile Criminal Division. The trial lasts more than 40 days. This is because it is purely a circumstantial case. There is still no body of Maike, no murder weapon, not even a specific crime scene. Accordingly, the weight and context of the individual pieces of evidence must be carefully weighed and placed in a context that allows for a clear conclusion should a conviction be reached. As I briefly mentioned earlier, not only are Michael and Christine accused, but also an accomplice who is said to have been present at the time of Maike's murder. His name is Manfred S., and he is said to be an old acquaintance of Christine's. According to Dominique's account, Manfred drove to the hospital with Michael on July 3rd to wait for Maike there. Manfred was essentially hired to murder Maike. However, Manfred S. cannot be charged due to frailty due to old age. At the time of the trial, he is 80 years old, suffers from Parkinson's disease, has had a heart attack and a stroke, and is confined to a wheelchair. On the first day of the trial, he was reportedly not even able to follow the proceedings mentally. Accordingly, the charges against him were dropped. Nevertheless, the prosecution is certain that he was deeply involved in the plot to murder Maike Thiel. He is described as a misogynist who acted on Christine's behalf. This is consistent with the fact that her son Michael withdrew large sums of cash from his savings account twice around the time of Maike's disappearance. One day before Maike's disappearance, he withdrew 4,500 German marks, and then another 2,500 in the period that followed. That's a total of 7,000 DM, or the equivalent of about 3,600 euros. From the perspective of the public prosecutor's office, this was Manfred S.'s payment. Michael is also said to have told this to one of the witnesses. Michael told the police at the time that he had withdrawn the money to buy a car. However, it was not until 3 years after Maike's disappearance that a new car was registered to Michael S. The public prosecutor's office does not believe his story about buying a car. The public prosecutor's office assumes that Michael waited for Maike outside the hospital under a pretext and lured her into his car. He then drove her and Manfred to a remote location with them in the back seat. After a brief argument in the car, Manfred and Michael killed Maike. How and where the two disposed of Maike's body is a matter of speculation. Over the years, numerous areas have been searched, entire streets have been torn up, and sniffer dogs have been sent in. Not a single trace of Maike Thiel has ever been found. An acquaintance of Manfred S. testified in court that he was fascinated by waste incineration plants. He repeatedly said that he used to drive rubble and waste to an incineration plant and simply dump it there. No one ever checked him there. Based on this, the police also investigated in this direction, but were unable to identify any incineration plant that could be connected to the Maike Thiel case. The two witnesses, Dominique and Lydia, both testify against Michael and Christine in court. They repeat their statements from the police interrogation in full and appear credible. However, Lydia later admits that she made her statement in court while under the influence of drugs. She says she was so upset that she just wanted to calm down a little. According to Lydia, both she and Michael had taken drugs at the time when Michael allegedly confessed to her that he had murdered Maike. the court decides that Lydia's statements are nevertheless credible and clear enough. And in the end, these are the pieces of evidence that point to Michael and Christine's guilt. Both Michael and his mother, Christine, are each sentenced to life imprisonment. They are found guilty of murder with malice aforethought and incitement to murder. According to the presiding judge, the chamber concludes that Christine S. had planned to murder Maike and then persuaded her son and her longtime acquaintance Manfred S. to carry out the murder. The exact motive for the murder was probably the child support payments that Michael, as the father of the unborn Charlene, would have had to make. Christine is said to have told witnesses that her family would under no circumstances pay child support to Maike Thiel. When Maike became pregnant, Michael was still in training and therefore earned very little money. Michael's mother, Christine, was a single mother of 2 children at the time and worked full-time as a lecturer at a private institute. The presiding judge is certain that Christine must have instigated the murder and that Maike and her daughter would still be alive today if it weren't for her. Since Christine is the instigator of the murder in this scenario, she is punished just as harshly as the actual murderer. The motive for Maike Thiel's murder was therefore the impending child support payments for Maike's unborn daughter, Charlene. With the 4-figure sum that Michael withdrew before the crime, the two would have had the necessary funds to incentivize an accomplice like Manfred S. to murder Maike. A note was found in Christine's apartment with Maike's exact doctor's appointment written on it. Despite otherwise remaining silent, Michael called Maike again the evening before the appointment and, according to Maike's friend, asked her again exactly when the appointment was. On the morning of the appointment, he was in the vicinity of the hospital where Maike was at the appropriate time. According to witnesses, both Michael and Christine had absolutely no interest in supporting Maike with the baby. And last but not least, 2 witnesses independently testified that Michael had confessed to Maike Thiel's murder to him. This is a pretty clear chain of evidence that convinced the court. There is no other plausible explanation for what could have happened to Maike Thiel. However, the story does not end with the verdict against Christine and Michael. Although the verdict was upheld by the Federal Court of Justice, mother and son are still fighting for a retrial. They claim to have been wrongfully convicted. So, could the verdict against Maike Thiel's murderers be a miscarriage of justice? During the trial, neither of them made a statement and remained silent throughout. According to later statements, both assumed until the very end that they would be acquitted. In 2024, Michael and Christine S. spoke to journalists. These interviews were broadcast as part of a 3-part documentary on the Maike Thiel case. This was met with criticism, as the program gave 2 convicted murderers a lot of space to explain their side of the story. And of course, both Michael and Christine present themselves in a very emotional manner. And that is, of course, their right. However, it also creates a gap between the 2 accounts, even though the producers of the documentary actually show a good, objective balance between the parties. It is important to listen to the 2 of them and to look at possible shortcomings in the investigation and the trial. But it is just as important to recall the weight of evidence that led to their conviction. Michael was seen near the hospital on the morning of Maike's disappearance. Christine told witnesses that she would prevent Michael from ever having to pay alimony. This would give both of them a motive. Christine had a note with Maike's exact doctor's appointment in her apartment and could not provide a verifiable and plausible explanation for what else this date and time could mean. Although the 2 were no longer really involved with each other, Michael called Maike on the evening before her doctor's appointment and, according to her friends, asked her again exactly what time it was. Around the time of the possible crime, Michael withdrew a 4-digit sum of money. He claims to have used it to buy a car, but it has been proven that he did not do so until 3 years later. Michael has no alibi for the possible time of the crime. Dominique and Lydia did not know each other, yet they both independently stated that Michael had confessed the murder to them. But there is also no murder weapon and no body. Maike Thiel and her unborn child have not been found to this day. And that is precisely why Christine cannot understand why a murder trial was held at all. so she is working through the case files herself to find any gaps that could prove her point of view. In 2019, Christine contacted an expert who reviewed Dominique and Lydia's statements. He concluded that the statements were not credible. Based on this expert opinion, which she paid for out of her own pocket, Christine also hired a new lawyer. The lawyer reviewed the credibility report and agreed with it. In his view, Christine and Michael should never have been convicted. And this despite the fact that this was even confirmed by the Federal Court of Justice, which is the highest court in Germany and therefore the only chance for a retrial. However, applications for this are rejected in almost all cases. This is because the prerequisite for such a retrial is that new evidence is presented that could be decisive and was not mentioned in the original trial. And as reported in 2024, this very evidence may have been found. In her statement, Dominique explicitly said that Michael had told her that Maike had bitten his arm as she was dying. So hard, in fact, that it left a scar. At the time, expert opinions on whether he had actually had a scar on his now tattooed arm were inconclusive. But that may now change. Over the years, science has naturally advanced. Michael and Christine's lawyers now have an expert opinion from a dermatologist. Michael himself financed this expert opinion. The dermatologist specializes in what is known as optical coherence tomography. This method is actually used for the early detection of skin cancer and scans the skin meticulously. The dermatologist cannot find any evidence of scarring on the entire arm. He considers it impossible that a bite wound that was supposed to have been visible for years after it occurred has now disappeared. The expert's conclusion is that Michael never had a scar on his arm. And that would mean that Dominique's statement is not credible, because she explicitly mentioned a scar caused by the bite. And if she lied about this factor, how credible would the rest of her statements be, which, together with Lydia's statement, led to Michael and Christine being charged and convicted in the first place? Based in part on the expert opinion, Michael and Christine's lawyers file a motion for a retrial. Like most of these motions, it is rejected. However, they do not give up and are actually successful in early 2025. The higher regional court declares the retrial admissible as the next instance. The skin analysis is accepted as new evidence. Although the optical coherence tomography procedure was already known at the time of the first trial, it was not considered suitable for such cases and was therefore not used. This view has since changed. And it is possible that the court would have decided differently at the time if such a skin analysis had definitively ruled out that Michael ever had a scar on his arm. However, this does not mean that the case will actually be reopened, but it is definitely a step that makes the possibility more likely. Nevertheless, the higher regional court warns that the expert's assessment that there was definitely never a bite wound should be critically questioned. Christine and Michael had also requested that their prison sentences be suspended until a final decision on a retrial, i.e., that they be released early. However, this was rejected and the two are still in prison today. According to the higher regional court, a new trial is probably only possible if this thesis can be proven 100%. It therefore remains to be seen how this case will proceed. It is likely that we will hear more about this case. Incidentally, a television crew tracked down the alleged accomplice Manfred S. in 2016. At the time, he was living in a retirement home and gave the crew a short interview. In this interview, he is said to have placed the blame for Maike Thiel's murder solely on Michael. He said that the boy was a smart boy and that he should also know where he did it. The journalist asked whether Michael had not told anyone where he had committed the crime, which he denied. Finally, I would like to express my condolences to Maike's family. The news that Christine and Michael have achieved partial success in court must have hit them particularly hard. After all, they had assumed that they would finally be able to close the legal proceedings after all these years. If the case is indeed retried, it would certainly be a great emotional burden for the bereaved. Please let me know what you think about this case in the comments. By doing so, you will also be supporting the channel. Any interaction increases the likelihood that the video will be recommended to people who haven't subscribed to Insolito yet. Other than that, there's not much else to say. I wish you a good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when you're watching the video, and hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, bye everyone.